So, is
Top-notch babysitter
kind of sexist to anybody else? Like, yeah, just a general question. And my goodness, I know, this is already a bit of a spicy question to ask, and probably a spicy opinion to hold. I kind of think it is, or at least I think it sort of is in some regards. Now, obviously, the intention behind the
beloved movie franchise
itself is largely uplifting and an inspiring
friendship power
type of story, where
Princess Melissa
is the main hero of the tale. Don't let the title fool you. This is not the
story of Prince Mel.
It's the
Story of Princess Melissa. Everybody says her name first in the title. Princess Melissa and Prince Mel. Don't let the fact that they're a duo fool you. When people say Princess Melissa and Prince Mel, 9 times out of 10 they'll say Princess Melissa first. They never say Prince Mel first, do they?
She's the main character, and that's all you need to know, really. It's simply how the
movies are
framed. And on the surface, I think it actually does send quite an empowering message, right?
It's both equal to men and women. They are best friends. They're a duo. Melissa and Mel are both superheroes, and they get the job done, and they save Battery City.
And through the vessel of
Princess Melissa,
we do see this play out on screen. When we first meet her, she's rather meek and scared and just not a very heroic or exciting character, or at least that's what she's like at the start of the timeline.
When you put all the movies in chronological order.
But after she's chosen by
the battery gods to have purple lightning powers,
all because of her selfless kindness, she begins to develop far more as a character. She becomes self-confident, a self-assured hero. She leads the duo to victory many times. She's not the damsel in distress. She's not some weakling that can't do anything right. She's the one that in the overwhelming majority of episodes comes up with the winning strategy that defeats the villain and
destroys the anti-battery.
And also, in the majority of the
movies,
she's also just straight up the person that does the most work within the winning strategy, while
Prince Mel
kind of awkwardly shuffles off to the side or gets defeated. You know, as is tradition. On top of that, over the course of the
many movies, it's Princess Melissa
that's chosen to be trained by
the battery gods and then helps defeat Bill Darrell in 3rd Gen 3 The New Beginning.
And it's her that leads the team of heroes. She's in charge. She's trusted to know all of the
team's strengths and weaknesses except for Prince Mel's, and give the team batteries to give them each unique superpowers and bless them with immortality.
And really, she's just the main leader in the effort to defeat
Bill Darrell, or the Almighty Darrell, or Bill.
Whatever you want to call him. Old smooth-brained
Bill
himself. And so yeah, in that regard, I do think
these movies have been a bit of a breath of fresh air. The kickoff or start of a new era, so to speak. But I do feel like Prince Mel gets shuffled off to the side like a lot, and I mean a lot.
But at the same time,
the movie franchise, for me at least, does not do quite as good of a job as telling the story of the equal friendship as well as some other franchises do.
And there are a few ways in which I've noticed this, but for starters, we can start with the hyperfixation on romance, or rather, the hyperfixation of the story to have
Princess Melissa constantly being forced to marry Bill Darrell by Bill Darrell,
driving most of the drama and the story development. And this is pretty much the exclusion of all else. And so yes, I'm talking about
Bill Darrell and his obsession with Princess Melissa.
Because when you think about
Princess Melissa. Because where does Princess Melissa spend most of her time, like almost all of these movies? And if you've not said trapped in Bill Darrell's dungeon,
then I'm sorry, you are the weakest link, goodbye. Pretty much every
movie
you'll ever see, you'll have this force its way into the story in some regard, and it never really changes. Even when she
spends half of her time with Prince Mel,
it's very brief, and then she's just back at it again. Her whole identity changes. She goes from
being the leader of her friend group
to a complete creepazoid. And with the flip of a coin, pretty much her whole identity revolves around
Bill Darrell.
And if you strip it away, she no longer has any real story beyond
hanging out with Prince Mel,
which is not enough, if you ask me, for a well-rounded character, let alone your protagonist. Even
all the other villains' plot points,
over time, largely become coloured by this obsession. All of their schemes and their discussions to try and
help Bill Darrell attempt to marry Melissa.
It's fine for a sometimes storyline, as I know
the villains in this universe usually are a team,
but it's such a dominant force in the story that I do think it actually actively harms
Melissa as a character, almost if the writers want to give her the Princess Peach and Bowser Miyamoto treatment.
It makes her whole arc dependent on this one guy, which doesn't feel very progressive to me. I mean, I'm not against romance, and I do think it has a place in the story, but the way it's framed is just very odd to me. I mean, it even spills over into a number of the other
main villains
and their relationships with
Princess Melissa,
our main hero. Take
Ben City,
for example. He's pretty much being set up as the main villain of the
beloved movie franchise's
next big saga.
He's replacing Bill Darrell. He's becoming the new leader of the fallen Bill Darrell Empire.
And so clearly,
he needed a reason to go up against Princess Melissa.
It just makes sense to have them at odds, right? To build up this rivalry whilst you can, before
Ben City becomes the new leader of the Build Arrow Empire and has to be the main villain by necessity.
And how is it, do you think, they built up this grand rivalry? How do you think they did it? That's right.
Ben City get extremely defensive over Build Arrow's death because he wanted Build Arrow to marry Princess Melissa.
That's how. That is the entire story of why they hate each other. What will turn out to be a
multiple movie rivalry
clash between these two characters boils down into an attempted
tug of war over Build Arrow even after he's dead.
Which, I don't know, it kind of worked at first until it basically just consumed their whole storyline. Even beyond the point of reason. Because after
Build Arrow's passing, Ben City is still going to have beef with Melissa because they're enemies, but still the main reason he's going to have beef with Melissa is because he thinks that she was responsible for the death of his friend, aka Build Arrow.
Like,
he's gonna
straight up try to ruin this girl's life. Same with
Dr. Vulture. Now, originally in the movie Melissa in Charge, most of his focus was on being a big bad villain that's independent, but in the movie The Graveyard, most of his villainous plans revolved around Build Arrow and making his master Build Arrow proud.
Even late into the game where, once again,
his goal this time around is to help Build Arrow take control of Mackay and Christopher so that he can distract Mel long enough to sneak away and marry Melissa.
I don't know. I do think it makes them seem like weaker characters. It feels lazy and contrived and falling into a lot of those old tropes that we probably want to get away from. I mean, I don't think they're overtly trying to be sexist or misogynistic or anything like that, but it certainly seems quite regressive to have so many of the
characters revolve around Build Arrow. Melissa, who is your main protagonist who is tied to Build Arrow as a character. You got Dr. Vulture and Ben City, two of your biggest antagonists who are tied to Build Arrow as a character. Even Martha Minor, her whole thing was revolving around dating Prince Mel's brother, Prince Mac, to make her master Build Arrow proud until she switches over to Ben City, who is conveniently set up to have major ties to Build Arrow. But yeah, they all have this in common. They all have major ties to the character Build Arrow. It's just a bunch of characters fighting over their opinions on Build Arrow. They lose all sense of character beyond that. It's like they're intentionally trying to get Build Arrow forced into the story in some way, shape, or form each and almost every single time. It's especially hard to take your main character, Princess Melissa, seriously when a major part of her character revolves around Build Arrow. Now let's take a look at Prince Mel. Prince Mel is the exact opposite of Princess Melissa. He has no character ties to Build Arrow other than hatred for Build Arrow. And you may think this will be a major part of his story arcs as a character.
But it's not in the same way. It's much reduced. And it doesn't define his relationships with pretty much every other character. Because there are major facets to his story and personality and interpersonal relationships that develop independently
around his friendship with Princess Melissa. Like his rivalry with the villains like Martha Minor, Ben City. Blanca, his encounters and attempts to rescue Frank Firefighter, his abusive relationship with Build Arrow who hates him for no reason.
Hell, even the development of his relationship with
Princess Melissa.
Because, like I said, that's a new thing. He doesn't
have an obsession with Build Arrow. He's genuinely a nice person and cares about his best friend Princess Melissa.
So it's a different relationship. And that for him, from his point of view, develops naturally and healthily. And only after that does that
make him care so much about Melissa to the point where he actually has a rivalry with Build Arrow because he cares about his friend.
His story develops into it. It's not the only facet of his personality. That is so much depth. He's a character that does not live solely to play out his obsession with
defeating Build Arrow.
And instead he has much more of a life and personality outside of that. It's just the difference in the way that the story deals with both their arcs that I do find really astounding and really regressive. Oh, and on top of that, can I remind anybody
how they treat the rejection of Build Arrow by Princess Melissa? Every time Build Arrow asks Princess Melissa the question of will you marry me and Princess Melissa says no repeatedly, he always tries to force her into a wedding, and then when she ends up defeating him, he cries in agony and pain. And consistently keeps coming back to tell her the same question of will you marry me, treated as if he has never learned his lesson and will keep not respecting her boundaries, and consistently try to hurt all of her friends, especially Prince Mel, as if he is misunderstood and a victim. Meanwhile, Princess Melissa, the one who says no, doesn't get the respect that she deserves for saying no. She's simply doing the right thing, and this will give them a perfect opportunity to focus more on Melissa and Mel's connection instead of Build Arrow. But the writers consistently bring Build Arrow back so he can be in love with Melissa like this was written by Miyamoto.
Oof. That's straight out of the Nice Guys subreddit, huh? But that's not all. And I would argue that this next one is probably the worst of it. It's how the
movie franchise
frames the arcs of its villains and the different way it wants you to view villains.
Like Blanca and Build Arrow versus villains like Ben City and Dr. Vulture.
Look,
Build Arrow's
a massive piece of shit. And you can't possibly try to deny that fact. It's just how it is. He abuses his
Prince Mel The top-notch babysitter's even his own teammate.
Really anyone, and is willing to sacrifice everybody in the world and anything in the world in pursuit of his selfish desire
Of marrying Princess Melissa.
even though, well, real talk, let's be honest, she
I love Bill Darrell at all. This is not the Mario Bros. Movie. In fact, her best friend is Prince Mel, and that's who she cares the most about, not Bill Darrell. So Bill Darrell is literally obsessed with hurting all of her friends,
and he does heinous shit to her,
her best friend in the whole wide world.
but at the last second he changes his mind and decides to be a good person. Like, he gets a literal last-second redemption, and then he's remembered as a tragic hero. What? He's a piece of trash.
But this movie franchise is framing him
As a hero at the end. What? Next up, look at...
Contortionist Jr., he's definitely next up for worst male villain in the franchise.
He bows down to the every whim of his abusive and narcissistic wife, allowing
His daughter to be just as twisted as Blanca.
And indeed, he engages in a shit ton of shady and corrupt dealings himself. And at the end of all of that, he ditches
His good friend Dr. Vulture so that he can stay in love with Blanca, and then he considers Dr. Vulture
a lost cause, with the show suddenly painting this dude as a victim and a hero for letting
hearing Dr. Vulture report verbally and then giving him back.
to be raised by his wife. His truly terrible, horrible, abusive wife. Sure, yeah, I guess he's a hero then, isn't he? So now we have two undeserved, I'd argue, redemption arcs for the major male antagonists. And hell, just another comparison.
Blanca, in her intro, does she not harass Mel or at least make him very, 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 very uncomfortable?
That ain't good.
And she tries to shoot down and kill millions and billions of innocent people and children, all because she has a desire to kiss Mel, but Mel says no. And recently the movies haven't really painted her
As a villain, no. He's an anti-hero. A bit of a badass who, yeah,
She makes a lot of mistakes along the way, but she's a strong woman. And she...
gets shit done. Come on now. But what about the...
Other core villains, what do they get? Any redemptions in sight? Well, we have Frank Firefighter, and he definitely gets a redemption. I would say it's one that's very, very well earned, too, because it's not just something that happened or came out of nowhere. Frank Firefighter gets injured helping Bill Darrell fight the top-notch babysitters, listens to Melissa and tells Bill Darrell to stop fighting her friends. And then Bill Darrell gets upset and goes way, way too far by trying to kill Prince Mel. And then Frank Firefighter intervenes and tells him to stop it. He's taking things way too far and that he doesn't actually love Melissa if he doesn't care about her friends.
Decent enough. Well written, I think. But then, who are our other
Core villains.
three truly terrible characters who show no remorse at all, no goodness, and by the end, there's no real positive qualities. We're talking
Ben City, we're talking Martha Minor, we're talking Dr. Vulture. Dr. Vulture, especially, is consistently blamed for everything wrong that Blanca has done. It's the Vulture's fault that Blanca turned out so evil. It's the Vulture's fault that Blanca's life was ruined by somebody rejecting to kiss her. She had to give up on her poor dreams of finding true love. It all reads like some made-up TikTok crappy storyline. On top of that, he's consistently being beat up by Pink Thor, who Blanca adopted because he says it's his fault for not being able to fight back against Pink Thor. So we shouldn't feel bad for Dr. Vulture at all. He's
just the worst piece of shitty trash. A terrible
villain, the worst one imaginable. So what does he get? No forgiveness, no redemption, no nothing. Because he's a mean birdie. And he hurt our sweetheart Blanca's feelings.
who was led astray by the power of
Mel not loving her romantically.
cringe. And then there's
Ben City, who's being set up to be the next big villain to replace Bill Darrell. Which, let's be honest, based on the trajectory of his character, I doubt he'll ever be given the same treatment as Bill Darrell, where he gets redemption and the writers try to explain his bad intentions from his character's point of view.
and then give a bit of a positive spin on them from time to time. Like
Bill Darrell and his wedding ring factory art. He's a misunderstood man who truly cares about Melissa and loves Frank Firefighter and Melissa's friends to some extent.
and then we move on to the arc of
Martha Minor, who is beginning to be a sympathetic villain to some regard, until they started making her seem like she was this terrible person for helping Ben City, because Ben City's a terrible monster. And Martha Minor shouldn't trust him. So they turn her from sympathetic character that was in love with Prince Mac, and then they transform her character based on the writer's perspective.
to raging asshole.
She's best friends with a man, that makes her a terrible villain. Her friendship with the other female villains like Blanca washed away. They abandoned her for giving up the love diamond and befriending a man named Ben City because their goals aren't the same. She wants to be friends with this man, not have a crush on him, and all of her female friends are gone because of that.
Feels like the writers are getting some sort of sick gratification out of writing the breakdown of a...
Anti-Ditcher Woman antagonist.
It's a yikes from me, dog. But no, I very much doubt they're going to give her the last second redemption where she apologizes and realizes she was wrong. She's going to go down with no regrets. The only reason she might be remorseful is that she didn't manage to destroy
All of the top-notch babysitter.
She's